And it looks like we have kind of a range of different people on the line, so I think it would be helpful if we do introduce ourselves to each other. I've also got Vickie Cammack and Etmanski sitting next to me here, so perhaps I'll just turn the video camera on for just for a moment so that we can see one another here. There we go, sort of see one another. There we go.
You've got to see Catherine too.
Yeah, I'll stick my head in the side. There we go. All right, so welcome everyone, and we'll just turn the camera off for a moment here while we do a range of introductions. Now, I believe Suzanne has just hit the record button. Thank you very much, Suzanne. So just so people on the line are aware, what we tend to do is record these sessions so that they are available as a resource to others in IICRD as we move forward with developing a social enterprise or a range of different social enterprises as the case may be. So perhaps what we'll do is a round of introductions, and then Al and Vickie can say a few words about themselves and their background, and use what you say as your starting point, as a launching point into the conversation. So for those of you who received my email, I had suggested that we consider a question that a leadership scholar and practitioner named Peter Block often asks people to get the conversations going. And this is the question of, what is the crossroads where you currently find yourself? And so we're very much aware that IICRD is convening these conversations, and so we know that there's a certain crossroads involved in transitioning from the nonprofit to the social enterprise sector. But we'd like to hear that in your own words, and perhaps what we could do is start with the folks from IICRD. So I know we've got Michelle and Cheryl, and and of course Suzanne is on the line, and there may be one other person, I'm not entirely sure. So perhaps we can start there and then move through the list of others, and you can think for yourselves, what is the crossroads that you're at? And perhaps for others who are on the line as well, if you could just give us a sense of what is drawing you to this conversation. What is it that interests you about this particular conversation that has brought you online this beautiful Tuesday afternoon? So that's enough from me. Perhaps Suzanne or Michelle, would one of you be interested in starting us off?
Yeah, sure. Suzanne here. I think this is actually a really good question because we are at a crossroads right now. The point where we have arrived is, starting to develop the social enterprise as a for-profit arm of IICRD. And so the question really where we're at is forming the entity of a social enterprise of a business, and its relationship with the nonprofit organization in terms of risk, investment, and profit structures. So yeah, I guess that's where we are at in terms of deciding next steps. We're looking at right now starting a market research, a feasibility study, and developing business plans, because we have a couple of different ideas that we would like to test and see, what is the market demand, and then develop a plan. So those next steps actually involve that question of what will be the structure of the new entity and how will that relate to the nonprofit. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, Michelle?
Sure. Michelle Cook here. I'm the Capacity Director at the Institute and have been with the Institute in a variety of capacities since its inception. And I think for me, around the crossroad component, having started this out of a passion to create change, starting with children, that we've really seen that happen. But with the change of funding structures and this being at an age now where we've been doing this for 25 years, realizing that we need to have some sort of sustainability that is not dependent on project funding, both in terms of a financial base, but also in terms of impact. really seeing that when you have a project and you're able to move certain things forward, it really build on your values and your approach and the pieces you're doing, and then after 3 years it's done. And there may or may not be funding, and ideally you build in that sustainability. We're really kind of looking at both the social enterprise as a means of a funding arm, but also as a way to have more sustainable impact and a broader impact to areas that may not have been able to be reached by projects. So ideally, like locally as well. So for me, that's a little bit of the crossroads component of that. So yeah, looking very much forward to this conversation. Very grateful to have Vickie and Al join us. I believe that we were meeting with Dave Howe this morning, and he's actually one of the people we are actually discussing around this social enterprise with the concept on Bowen. So small worlds as the circles get smaller.
That's great, Michelle. Yes, you're right. We were meeting with Dave Howe this morning, so it's an incredibly small world and interconnected, certainly. So thank you so much. That gives us a good background. I wonder if perhaps we could switch over to Cheryl. I know that perhaps you're maybe a little bit more arm's length than Suzanne and Michelle, but still obviously directly involved with IICRD. If you could, Cheryl, maybe just say a couple of words. Even answering the question for yourself, what is the crossroads that you're at, or what is it that draws you to this conversation?
Perfect. Thanks, Catherine. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. My name is Cheryl Hiccup, and I'm I was going to say the research director at IICRD, but that's not what I am at all. I'm actually an associate with IICRD, and I also am an associate faculty at Royal Roads. For me, having been with IICRD for the last 8 years, I sort of see the crossroads that I'm at personally, but also as an organization, is how do we ethically generate resources to enable us to follow our passions and to support children, youth, and families and communities in a sustained and impactful way. So for me, that's why this conversation is really important for both me as an individual and as an organization. Thanks.
That's great, Cheryl. Thanks very much. And perhaps just, is Derek, are you still on the line? Or I see Elena might be on the line too. So whoever jumps in first there, either Elena or Derek, if you want to go ahead and just share what is the crossroads you're at, or you know, what's drawing you to this conversation. I'm not sure whether Elena's microphone is hooked up, so why don't we go with you, Derek?
Can you hear me?
Derek?
Okay. Yeah, I'm just, I'm at a crossroads. I think it's a matter of connecting with most of the people, I think, that are on the line, and very interested in contributing to this space, about to enter a residency in social innovation in Banff, exploring a project in the Salish Sea that's about helping to connect up these kinds of activities so that we can be more effective and maybe scale some of these things. So I'm happy to be part of the conversation.
That's great, Derek. Thanks very much. Elena, is your microphone available? Are you able to hear us or speak on the line?
Hi, Catherine. Can you hear me?
Absolutely. Go for it.
Great. Sorry I missed earlier. I mainly wanted to listen in on this conversation. I have my 2 little ones who are eating macaroni in front of me, but I did want to certainly listen in to Al and Vickie, and thank you so much for coming to share your ideas, and we really appreciate your reflections.
That's great, Elena. Thanks. And sorry, I just found your message that you'll mostly be on mute, so that's no problem. Wonderful to have you on the line. Thank you. So Wendy Kenward, is your microphone working these moments? Would you like to say a quick hello?
I'm on the phone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
can. Great. Thank you. It was a bit of a juggle, but I'm here. My name is Wendy Kenward, and I work actually in the interior. I don't know a lot about IICRD, but I've been working in fundraising and community development and social services for quite a few years. And like a few people have mentioned, really not struggle, but really look at that balance of the contract dependent versus independent and sustainability piece around our services and programs. So, you know, as you flagellating to try and get more and more resources with less and less available. So I'm really interested in the dialogue in the broader picture sense, and hoping I can contribute and also bring some things back down to my community level. So thank you for inviting me in.
That's wonderful, Wendy. Welcome. And perhaps it looks like Philip might be on the line. Philip, do you might need a moment just to get settled. I know you're in a different time zone. Just jump in whenever you're ready to say a few words. I'm not sure if that's now. I can see that your mic is on, so go for it if you'd like. Otherwise, we can keep doing just a brief round of introductions.
Yeah, no, that's fine, Catherine. I'm in many different zones right now, actually, so going from those multiple to another one really doesn't affect me all that much, probably, at this point in time. Hi, everyone. Philip, Executive Director of the IICRD, calling in from London. So I'm very happy to be part of this. Sharing Vickie and Al, thank you so much for agreeing to step in on this. It's a real honor to have you both with us.
That's great, Philip. Welcome. And did you want to say something, Vickie? Or no? Great. Okay, so let's continue on. I know we've got Allison and Kathy on the line as well. So this is just a wonderful group of really passionate, committed people. So it's a delight to be here this afternoon. Allison, if you just want to say a few words, either you know, the crossroads you're at or your interest in this conversation, and then perhaps when Allison you're finished, Kathy, feel free to jump in right away.
Sounds good.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Allison Kite. I very much appreciate being included today. I work for the Canadian Mental Health Association, the Kelowna and District Branch, and I just absolutely relate to everything that's been said already, in particular Suzanne and Michelle. We're at the same situation. Of course, mental illness is not going away. Our mental health needs as a community are increasing, but our net government funding is shrinking, and our funding is so often just a one-time thing. So in order to fund innovation and to fund promotion and prevention for mental health, it's very challenging, and our organization is in the same situation. We're also exploring what it would be to have a social enterprise that can bring in revenue that has no strings attached, that we are free to use for the projects and the needs of our community in the moment. So thank you very much. I'm very interested to hear what happens today.
Hi everyone, my name is Kathy Sturgeon. Where to start? I'll try to keep it really brief, but I got connected with this group actually when I participated in the Doing Good for Nothing session for the IICRD, and wow, was it ever fantastic to see everything that this group is doing and what they're trying to achieve and the direction they're trying to go in the future. So I'm at a professional perhaps crossroads. I have a business background and I have an arts degree, language background. Currently doing my master's in leadership at Royal Roads. Very familiar with wonderful Catherine. And I am currently like a kid in a candy store and a sponge, and I'm trying to put my hands on everything I can read about social innovation, social enterprising. I'm helping some organizations here in town try to make the jump and try to scale as well and add the for-profit portion. And basically passionately about just trying to help organizations thrive to be the best for the world instead of being the best in the world, perhaps. And I had the privilege of listening to Vickie at SC Catalyst and read that wonderful book of Al and Vickie, Impact, which is wonderful. So I'm really excited to be here and learning and hearing about sharing with everyone here in this room.
That's wonderful, Kathy and Allison. Thank you so much. So Al and Vickie have been taking a few notes or taking interest in your areas of interest. So I don't think I need to say much more at this point. Perhaps I'll pass it over to Vickie first, and I'll just turn the video on briefly so you can have a sense of her, and then I'll probably turn the video off a couple minutes in. Vickie, without any further ado, over to you to get started here.
Greetings, everyone. Thanks so much for your reflections, and it really, I think, bodes well for us to have a nice, juicy conversation here today. We're certainly going to share a little bit of our own story and our adventures in the world of social enterprise. But what I'd love to know, actually, there's just a couple of quick things that would be really helpful. And I'm thinking particularly from Suzanne and Michelle, but also Cheryl as well. There were a couple of things that were said. I mean, I'm curious if there is a particular initiative that you are now seeking to do the feasibility study and business plan around, and if there is, that would be helpful to know. And my second question really is more to Cheryl, where you spoke about ethically generating resources, and I'm wondering what your concerns are in that realm. So those are two questions that would help me, I think, in sort of framing our story and answering your interests.
Great. Suzanne, do you want to jump in? Or Suzanne or Michelle or Philip or Elena, I suppose, could speak to just the concrete ideas that you're seeking the business plan on now, and then perhaps Cheryl could chime in after with the answer to that line of thinking.
Sure, I could go ahead, Suzanne here. Yeah, the Doing Good for Nothing event, we pitched 3 different ideas. One is the idea of creating a CSR certification structure around the concept of children thriving. So is the business supporting children to thrive, and in which capacity? And that was brainstormed at the Doing Good for Nothing event as, you know, being a training and monitoring, evaluation, certification model. So we're looking at, you know, is there market demand for this? We definitely see, you know, a potential social impact it could have to give this kind of certification to different businesses or organizations or programs. But we don't yet know if there's actually, you know, a revenue stream feasible for that. So that's sort of the next step we're looking at. And the second idea was the development with purpose. Maybe I'll let Michelle and Philip talk about that. And the third idea is creating a Child Thrive Center here in Victoria, which is destined to be, you know, a hub for different activities and programs for children to thrive. So I'll just pass it on to Michelle and Philip, because right now I think we're mostly interested in exploring the CSR idea and the development with purpose idea as 2 different possible social enterprises. And yeah, the third one we're not sure about right now. So we're just leaving that on the back burner for now.
Philip, I'm going to hand it to you just because I already spoke earlier, so I'll give you a chance to chime in. Perhaps not.
Hi, Michelle. I had myself muted. I've got some background noise here, so I hope it doesn't get in the way. So the development with purpose is the result of about 3 years of discussion in the Gulf Islands, which includes, you know, sort of from Quadrant down and then Pender and over to Bowen, on alternate opportunities for employment generation in the islands. Michelle and I live on Pender Island. And we've been looking at ways that we can bring together the child-focused work, community asset building work of IICRD with something to do with the Gulf Islands, and ideally a link with education as well, because one of the challenges with the Gulf Islands is that the economies are somewhat fragile at the moment, particularly since the economic recession. the opportunities are limited in terms of new economic opportunities, and we tend to go through these seasonal cycles where things are very active in the summer and then they kind of taper down and die off in the winter. So we've been engaged in a discourse with a number of colleagues living in the Gulf Islands, people involved in community development, the governance leadership of the island's trust, and the representatives from our Capital Regional District, and more recently developers, particularly property developers, because there is a market on the islands for property, both in terms of ownership of property, but also resorts on the islands. And where that's landed at the moment, to cut a long story short, is we've been invited to partner with a group that is developing a property on Bowen Island. It's called Storm Mountain. A fair bit of investment that's been put in with the economic recession. There's a good likelihood that people are going to lose money in that investment. And so there's an interest in opportunities to bring greater value to property investments. And because we're living in a time when many of the purchasers of property are the baby boom generation, who are themselves very interested in not only buying a piece of property, but having something larger than that, something with meaning when they purchase that property, we've come together to look at potentially creating a company that would focus on development with purpose, which would basically focus on 3 dimensions of developing properties. One would that revolve around family and children particularly. One would be in the actual design of the property, where things like food sharing, the actual connection with nature, opportunities for collective play and creativity. So it's not just focused on children, it's also how families and multiple generations come together. Educational opportunities, where we might draw in our relationship with Royal Roads for guest speakers, the continuing studies program in regards to presentations that would be inspiring and interesting for people, and possibly a link with some of our work in the Global South, where simply some of the revenue would be channeled to that project in the Global South, one of our projects, and there might also be opportunities for people to visit that initiative and feel a sense of connection and purpose with something that's benefiting children not only on Bowen Island, but in a very different part of the world where children have many fewer opportunities. So that discussion has gone a good ways down the road, and it looks like we're going to move forward with that in the fall of this year. And there is already some investment there to start it. There's been discussions with Van City, a number of foundations in Vancouver, and there's interest in this idea of development with purpose as a result of that. I'll stop there. Michelle, I don't know, maybe you want to add anything?
I just wanted to add really quickly, one of the key foundations of the concept is that it's a development with a heart, and so it would have a central piece that connects all ages, and to create a sense of thriving. And the one on Bowen Island would be particularly focused on housing for Down syndrome as they age up, I guess, and also seniors, but you know, as part of a larger community that would be created as part of the development. So that's it.
Thanks, Michelle and Philip. That's great. And maybe just a few quick words from Cheryl about the ethical dimension.
Thanks, Catherine, and thanks for the question, Vickie. I think when I raised the point about ethically generating resources, how can we work in partnership with organizations, with institutions, with people who are really committed to supporting children, families, and communities to thrive and aren't necessarily harming children's ability to thrive? So it's a delicate dance, specifically when there's a lot of money coming from, you know, the energy sector and things. How can we work with those people or those organizations to maybe even change their practices too? So it's not saying no, but it's recognizing that where are the entry points and how can we work with those actors to actually support young people to thrive.
Great. Okay, that's really fantastic. It's really wonderful. Thank you for all of your responses. This is very exciting, actually, to hear about your thinking and how you're really stretching to think about how you can extend the impact of your work and looking at these new kinds of models. I will say in our own experience with PLAN, Plan itself is a pioneering social enterprise. So Plan's 25 years old. It's a nonprofit charity, so that's the actual structure. But the fundamental part about Plan is that it's not taken government funding, and that is the way that Plan has, by the way, affected the no strings attached wording that came up from one of our participants. And Plan has supported itself through a number of entrepreneurial activities, including relationships with other people who are actually in a similar business to Plan, which is helping families to secure the future. So those would be lawyers, financial planners, banks, and so on. So that's been one of the key ways that Plan's remained independent from government funding, and the second way has been really through charging a fee and a service for families, for those who can afford to pay. So that's just one sort of starter point. I think underpinning the structure question, there's a few things to consider. Like I actually think that it would be very possible, for example, for you to do potentially the CSR certification training and monitoring within your current structure. You may not need to change it at all. It really is dependent on if you think it's going to make a huge whack of money that somehow will distort your year ends in a way that jeopardizes your charitable status, but it could actually be a small enterprise that you run basically within your operations. And education is a charitable activity itself. There's all kinds of other options as well now, with the CCC kinds of companies that can be formed. I currently also sit on the board of an organization that's focused on group decision making and group wisdom, and it has a for-profit arm and a non-profit arm, and the way that they've structured it is that the non-profit actually holds the intellectual property. It's a technology company, so that's another way to protect it. We actually, in our work at Plan, one of the fundamental things that we did and continue to do at Plan is to address isolation through the creation of personal networks. And Al and I became great students of how do we actually increase the impact of our work. We were replicating our organization and realized that that work was quite slow going. And we were successful in the replications, but it was slow, and the impact of the organizations themselves was limited. So we decided to look at other means, and one of those means was actually going into a for-profit business to take our core competency of addressing isolation. And so we married that core competency, that of the creation of personal networks around people vulnerable to isolation, and we married it with the new social networking technology to create TIE's personal networks, which is a kind of a sort of a private personal Facebook. And we took the learning, again, our core learning, out into the world beyond people with disabilities. So TIES is used by people who are aging, people caring for their for their older parents, people facing chronic and complex diseases. And I'm going to talk about the structure, and then I want to just come back to the mission for a moment. So the structure that we did with TIES was a for-profit social mission business, and we put the IP into the business in order to actually attract the private investment capital. That was a key thing that was really, really relevant. But we also made Plan a 51% owner. So that was one of the ways of trying to secure the mission, although over time, as an organization, as a company grows and you get more investors in, maintaining that big stake in the ownership becomes harder and harder. So that's just an observation about some of the structural things. And we can go into way more detail about any of that if you want. The only other observation I think I want to make at this point is this challenge of wanting sustainability and a revenue source, and I believe it needs to be maintained. It needs to be combined with something that Michelle said, it's sustainability beyond projects, in your words, Michelle, but it's about financial sustainability and about the extending the impact. And for me, that's a real core dimension of any of the enterprising work. And I think a lot of us get sort of sidetracked and start engaging in entrepreneurial endeavors that don't have very much to do with our core competency. And the classic example could be, you know, the small nonprofit that then starts a thrift store. That may not have anything to do actually with what the services are that they deliver every day. And, you know, we can see how that works on a small scale, but if you really are about your impact, you know, if your core mission is somehow embedded in the core product and service that you want to put into the enterprise, that then is a certain, for one thing, you're going to have a lot of expertise in that area, and it gives you a certain kind of credibility and what I would call gravitas as you enter into the for-profit world that I think is very, very critical and will guide a lot of those challenges that you referred to, Cheryl, in terms of some of the ethical dilemmas. So maybe I'll pass it over to Al for a few reflections now.
Well, hi everybody, and thanks for the opportunity to get to know your organization and your mission much better. And I congratulate you on everything that you've done so far and on this grand challenge that you've set for yourselves. Maybe what I could do is just talk about an evolving, very practical approach to social enterprise that we use. And I think Catherine sent you an excerpt from one of the chapters in the new book, and it's referenced there. But for us, the social enterprise really evolved out of our dictum that we wouldn't take any money from government, because we just saw how those strings just pulled us away from our central mission. And social enterprise then really became survival behavior for us. And I agree with Vickie that it may sometimes involve creating a new business, looking at a new structure, but in our experience, social enterprise is something that can become meaningful to everybody who works in an organization, and it's almost a way of thinking as well as a way of earning revenue. And so to that end, social enterprise involves four things. One, it enables us to fulfill our mission, program objectives, however you want to describe it. Secondly, it brings value to our membership or our constituency, so however you define that, but you could imagine that it's as broad as you want to make it. And thirdly, that it brings value to your partners, and this is sometimes often forgotten in a mix. So a lot of people think social enterprise is a way to make money, which you can then pour back into the original organization. And so you treat partners, particularly business partners, as mere occasions for money and nothing more, as opposed to the opportunity that the partnership could bring you. So bringing value to your partners, particularly your business partners, can be a very significant force for change. And then fourthly, and only fourthly, and I always put it last, it can allow you to earn money. And the emphasis is on earn money, as opposed to treating it as I mentioned earlier, as a fundraising strategy. And this kind of resource revenue that comes from this fulfills everything that you've described earlier. It gives you flexible dollars to invest in initiatives that you can't typically get through the grant-making process. It allows you to invest at scale if you figure out a way to blend or leverage your limited resources with the resources from government or business or some combination of those plus other partners. It allows you to invest in proper salaries for staff, so you can attract and keep good people for longer, which plays a big role in impact, as I'm sure you know. And it allows you to invest in IT, which is another aspects of infrastructure. So those are all elements of social enterprise, and all of those can take place, to repeat what Vickie said and I mentioned earlier, that they can all take place within the existing nonprofit apparatus. Couple of very, very simple examples, not nearly as sophisticated as the ones that you've described, but we started out thinking we needed a three-wing binder of some kind to offer to families based on our mission to help them create a good life for their son or daughter with a disability, both now and in the future when the parents die. And that morphed into a book. Well, we actually turned that into a business and have made significant money from our books. I think we have over 20 editions of our previous books out there around the world, and are currently working with families in Brazil and in England and in Japan to enable them to develop a way of codifying, their expertise, but also earning revenue in those local communities. So that is an example of fulfilling a mission, bringing value to our members. We've always pre-sold the books, and so we have partners in British Columbia right now. They're being distributed through the credit union system and through the Bank of Montreal. The Vancouver Foundation has prepaid the books to bring a nice tidy profit to plan as a result of it. So families get the books, the financial institutions get to reinforce their interest in supporting families who have sons and daughters with disabilities. And lastly, it gives plans some flexible dollars to in the past to invest in the RDSP campaign. So that's a very simple example. I'll just finish with another one where we conceptualized our constituency as the whole disability market in the Greater Vancouver or Metro Vancouver area, and created a relationship or partnership with Vancity, whereby all funds under administration by people with disabilities, by their families, by the businesses that their families ran, by allied professionals who had businesses or accounts, etc. You get the picture. And Vancity gave a percentage of those funds under investment, a very small percentage, to plan instead of allocating those to marketing. So the families or the businesses still got all the equivalent rate of returns that they would get anywhere else. Vancity increased member loyalty. We agreed to make to teach Vancity how to become more disability family friendly, and plan to earn money again, which we were able to pour into our registered disability savings plan campaign. So at its height, that was bringing in well over $250,000 annually of unfettered dollars to be used for the kind of impact that we wanted. So those are maybe two examples of that working definition of social enterprise. Anyway, I don't know how helpful either of those are, but open to a discussion or some comments, based on that.
Great. Well, I think maybe I'll just turn the camera off. You can see that we're moving the computer around here. But why don't we just open it up to a round of conversations. Now, I've put a couple of people on mute. So if you want to say something, but for some reason you're having a hard time unmuting yourself, please just type a little note in the chat box. I wonder, first maybe the folks at IICRD, any immediate questions come to mind from any of you? And of course, if not, any other if there are any other questions that are coming to mind.
Yeah,
go ahead,
Catherine, it's Philip here. Yeah, I have one. One thing I'm not sure about, Vickie and Al, is whether Plan existed prior to you becoming a social enterprise, because one of our opportunities and challenges, I guess, is that IICRD has existed for almost 25 years, and so this is a new tack for us, and we're comfortable. We've been an entrepreneurial organization from the very beginning. We started off being based in an academic setting, and then we became an NGO, and we're kind of a hybrid now, NGO academic, and we've carved our own niche in that area, and this is another extension, I guess, of that entrepreneurial thinking. But what we're contemplating here is definitely a new step, and so there is a bit of tension, I think, in the organization in terms of how we just keep everything else that's going on moving along while we start this new enterprise, and it does draw quite a bit of energy and thoughts and different types of social and other capital into it. And I'm wondering if you went through that same process, or whether you just started with plan and were able to launch things at that point.
Yeah, I mean, a couple things in response to that. So Plan itself, you know, it's a nonprofit charity, but it was, from the beginning, I think it began with an entrepreneurial mindset. And that's in part by, you know, that was held in part by Al and I and by the families that we created Plan with. So that's really it. I mean, the structure is not a unique structure at all. It's a nonprofit and nationally incorporated, actually provincially incorporated charity. So our history is different than yours in that we haven't come, you know, from an educational route and so on. But that, you know, one of the key points I think that we both made is that you can do a lot of entrepreneurial work within that structure. So whether or not you need to pursue other structures, I think is a question to ask yourselves, and what would be the advantage of going one way or another. I will say that in the creation of TIES, so again that was in the creation of a social mission for-profit business, that was created while we actually had created a second nonprofit charitable organization called Plan Institute, and that's where TIES was birthed from that organization. And it took a very brave and non-risk averse board to say yes, in a sense, to go for it. They could see the advantage. They were all equally passionate about spreading this idea of networks, of personal networks further out into the world, and they saw the potential of the model. What we did within the charity was we actually secured some foundation funding to get a very, very comprehensive business plan done by people with a lot of expertise in the technology world in particular, because that's what we were creating, was a technology. But there did come a time when, you know, as Anais Nin, I think, says, you know, there comes a time when bird in the hand, you have to let it go anyway, or the risk to stay tight in the bud was too great, and so we needed to make that separation. And I know for me, as the leader of, I was the executive director of Plan Institute at that point, and then to try to also manage TIES, it really was too much. There came a time in which I had to make a decision about where I was going to be, and it was clear to me that I would go with the for-profit business. And there were some consequences of that. The consequences to the Institute were not insignificant. I don't think that there was adequate succession planning on my part to really have left. And the Institute still functions and it's fine, but it wasn't easy, I think, for the Institute once TIES had separated, and there was a lot of fear that TIES would become way more significant in the world than the Institute, and all of those kinds. It was a very, you know, it's interesting waters to navigate. And the other thing I'll say about it is that if you decide to hive off and to create, even though it's joined, you know, structurally or ownership-wise or whatever, if you decide to create a separate entity, and if you decide to really go for one of these initiatives, don't think that you're going to hire somebody outside to come and run it. That if you're going to be building on your expertise and spreading your message, are we okay? Mm-hmm. Sorry, we just heard a click there. We thought maybe it turned off. If you're going to be running to spread your impact and your mission and so on, it's going to take one of your key leaders to jump in hook, line, and sinker and stick with it. Thanks, Vickie. And I think Al might have something to add in response to that too. That's great.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I can feel the tension. I think probably the argument I would make is that, and I'm generally pretty lazy about this, about social enterprise. So that I think the easiest place to develop a social enterprise mindset and practice is to look at the existing programs that we operate to see whether there's a social enterprise potential there. And so, of course, you may at some point find the need to create a new structure, whether it's a community contribution company or whether it's a full-on business or creating a separate nonprofit that allows you to do something risky, as Vickie has described. All of those may be possible, but I think the low-hanging fruit is to look at one's existing array of programs and services and to see how those can be social enterprised. And again, my definition is one in which you're bringing value to your members, increasing membership, bringing values to your partners, creating a broader distribution system, fulfilling your mission, and earning money. So I would argue that is an easier way of moving into the social enterprise world, so that in fact you're, in my view, resolving that tension that you mentioned, Philip. And then the only other thing, I would add is that despite the grand promises of social enterprise and social finance, I'm generally pretty cautious, about them, and do not want to throw all my eggs into those baskets. And so, just to reinforce what Vickie had mentioned earlier, is I think you want to find structures in which you can continue to access all of the current sources of money and revenue that you have, and adding more onto it, rather than seeing it as a dichotomy. My own definition of social finance is that it's the infrastructure to finance social enterprise, and that it involves the various sources of money talking to each other, leveraging each other in order to attract new sources of capital. So I don't know if that's useful or not, or too abstract.
Yeah, I'm just going to add to that. It's great. I actually haven't heard that definition before, Al, that social finance is various sources of money talking to each other. And I will just share when, for example, at TIES, again, for-profit business, well, we partnered a lot with Plan Institute as a nonprofit charity that was able to attract certain project funding and then contract with TIES to deliver part of the service. Maybe Plan Institute was doing research related to the impact of the social or personal private networks for caregivers and so on. So was there, things looking at what if people use less service, for example, when they have a network, or if they have more security, or they get sick less often, and so on. So the Institute was able to get the contracts for the research and then contract with the business to actually deliver the product. So there is that, that sometimes the advantage of the multiple structures is that you do actually get to access the various sources of capital and get them, as Al said, to talk to each other.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because we're actually having similar conversations within the Institute now, and that in some ways the accreditation innovation idea could very well be used to monitor the development with purpose one. So there might be a virtuous circle that we could look at as this goes forward. But yeah, no, that was your reflections were really helpful and very, very apropos. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, of the three, I think you've landed on the one that, the way I understand it, which is very limited, that enables you to work within your existing apparatus, Philip, and in fact to potentially accelerate and expand an existing program offering. So in other words, it's a potential for fulfilling a mission. And I would think that sitting down to strategize around that might satisfy you, your staff, and your board and members that there's not as much tension, within social enterprise as you think.
Mm-hmm.
So thanks for the great question, Philip. I wonder if anyone else on the line, including our wonderful colleagues who have joined us from outside of IICRD, is there anyone else who has a follow-up question or comment to make at this point? And again, if I've muted you, my apologies. Please jump in if there's any further reflections, either directly related to IICRD or more broadly that can help inform us in this conversation. Always this little.
This is Allison.
Yeah, go ahead, Allison.
Oh, I'll just jump in. I don't have a question, but I just really want to express my appreciation because I think where our board of directors and our organization is at is been this back and forth between do we look internally at something existing, which we have done and unfortunately hasn't brought in the revenue source that we hoped and really has more impact as a program. Or now do we look again internally or do we look externally at just business ideas? And I just want to say thank you so much because I feel swayed again in a good way, and this just really gives me some great questions to bring back to the organization to take this conversation further and strategize around what is existing. So thank you very much.
Good, thank you, Allison. And I think Al might have a follow-up comment here.
Sometimes it's very hard to know what your expertise is. This may seem insulting, and I don't mean it that way at all, but a couple of people that we have a lot of respect for who were early pioneers in the social enterprise world, taught us two different things. The first one, taught us that we actually weren't in the disability business. We weren't in the future security of people with disability business at all. We were in the communication business. And I know that sounds trite, but it began, we began to think of what it takes to be a communication nonprofit or a communication social enterprise, and how to get the word out in a social entrepreneurial way. And so that was very helpful, and we could talk more about that. And then once you're clear, and again, impossible to do on a short call, but I really think that sometimes within the nonprofit sector that we undersell what we have to offer, and we're not as clear about our essence. And so going through that is very important. And then secondly, the second lesson we were taught is who needs and who wants what we have to offer. And so this helps, and I'm sure it's part of this, strategic evaluation that you're currently doing with some of the three projects you've got on the table. But there are potential customers for what you have, especially the clearer you are about it, so that you're not having to push your stuff at them. You're not having to sell it. You're not having to convince people that this is something new that they've never thought of, given that most people already have well-defined missions and priorities, but that you fit in a way in which when you're talking to your potential partners, whether in our case, whether they were businesses, other nonprofits, or government, we were able to make an argument that this will increase your capacity to do what you want to do, Madam Partner or Mr. Partner. So both of those, sometimes those questions are sometimes obscured by or obfuscated by the the density or the fog surrounding the ordinary day-to-day work within a nonprofit. Anyway, those were kind of lessons that we learned along the way.
Hi, it's Wendy. Can I just ask and add something to that, Al? I think that I have a question that's kind of bubbling for me there, and that's around also the piece around social innovation and how in a nonprofit we quite often get sort of, for all intents and purposes, we get in our own ways and we get stuck with what the expectations are, especially when we've been funded externally by contracts or grants and have to follow rules and certain things. And so there's a balance or a dance there around trying to be innovative and do something that draws on your essence and does really good work, and break out of what the expectations have been prior, but then also balance to partnerships and what is socially driven, right? What people will accept in terms of those partnerships. I struggle with that piece because there's lots of really great innovative models, but people are so used to, well, we do it this way within our world, right? Within the social services world.
Yeah, and I think Vickie should jump in here, but this is why I tried to make the argument at the beginning of the call that it's really a cultural challenge that we're talking about here, yeah. As well as a technical challenge about how do you create a business out of a nonprofit. Those are details. That's kind of like hiring, in my view, hiring car mechanics for your car, but you have to decide where you want to drive the car and the kind of vehicle. So if we are moving into a hybrid vehicle, and that's what we're getting, then those are all values and related to values and vision and the kind of action that we want to see come out of our values and vision. And that, in my view, is cultural. And so I've always been very reluctant to work with nonprofits who simply wanted to use social enterprise as although they dressed it up, but as a fundraising strategy. I was only interested if they wanted to talk about the impact on every member of the board, on the people who answer the phone, as well as the program people, as well as the leadership and membership, so that it's a way of thinking about the world that is abundance in mentality, and that sees doing good as something that involves collaboration. And the money comes behind that.
Although if you're going to go into real enterprise, you've got to get comfortable that you're making money. Yeah, you have to make friends with money. You have to make friends with charging people for things. That's the deep cultural stuff as well that most of us in this sector don't have any comfort with at all, because we've come with this social justice mindset. So that's it's a very, very big shift. And the other piece was sort of back to this idea of no strings attached, and this sense that you're going to have freedom because you're getting money from another source. I think the freedom might come from mixing all the sources, but I can tell you that any of the sources have strings attached to them. There are different kinds of strings, different kinds of accountability, different kinds of transparency, and if you're venturing into this world, you really need to get familiar with all of those strings. There is no free ride, is the reality in it, but the advantage of going into this world is, again, that there's some sustainability in the model of having multiple sources of income, that you're not completely dependent on one source, one form, and so that does provide a little bit more sustainability. But again, I think our biggest point to you all is just simply that if you're going to go into this world, make sure that what you're engaging with furthers your mission, that it's not just a kind of an offshoot to generate revenue.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, Vickie and Al, and to everyone on the line. Really appreciate your questions that help us to deepen our thinking all around, whether at IICRD or beyond. We are running this series every Tuesday in June, and so next week the guest speaker is Rachel Holmes, who has been rather involved in various ministries with the provincial government in the innovation portfolio, and so she'll be able to link this conversation with some of the larger provincially based conversations around social innovation and social enterprise. And so I hope some of you will be able to join us next week as well. I'll certainly send the information around by email. But right now I'd really like to thank Al and Vickie for sharing their expertise and their experiences. Certainly this is just the beginning. It's like an appetizer or a tapas part of the conversation. There are many more questions, and hopefully the conversation has sparked some of those. So I'll wrap it up there, and perhaps Suzanne, you could maybe stop recording the session, and if there are any just final lingering comments or questions, you're welcome